Okay, so welcome back to the Govtech show. So today's show is why we're doing this. What the hell is this all about? What's the podcast, the Govtech show for? Who's it for? Why is it? And why did we get here? Why are we doing it?
Yeah, I think we're going to be doing a bit of role reversal today. We're putting you in the hot seat, Daniel.
Yeah, so I'm obviously Daniel Cremin from Civico. For quite a while, I've been wanting to run this podcast. So since I've been in the world of developing solutions for committee meetings and seeing how the technology has evolved and developed since before COVID, and then right the way through COVID, then post COVID, and now the stones have landed and things are beginning to calm down, but there's still an awful lot of new technology coming in. Something that I find is that the people that we meet don't have the time that I have to go around to trade shows in America or Barcelona or wherever to see what is the latest tech and how can we streamline, how can we improve even further your standard committee meetings in a council chamber or in a committee room. And I appreciate it's a very niche environment. So you would kind of say, of all the things, now people say to me, well, don't you do like events and don't you do education or whatever? We do little bits of that when it comes in, but our 95%, probably even more than that, is just working with councils, looking at how they are arranging their committee meetings and what technology can streamline it. Because actually, the improvement is not the technology. The improvement or the cost saving is how do you save officers time? Because for such an awful long time, they were having to spend, well, they were being turned into IT experts, which is not what they signed up for. So before COVID, you just simply rocked up at a council meeting or a committee meeting. You had some microphones. And at that point, go back 2008, 2010, there weren't even cameras. So some people were doing audio streaming. And then beyond that, sort of 2012, 2014, that's when video cameras started to come in. And we had, I don't know if you might remember, there's a guy, an MP called Eric Pickles, and he announced that members of the public for the first time were allowed to go into a council chamber and they could film any public meeting could be filmed by any member of the public, and the local authority weren't able to stop them from doing that. So you had a scenario where a member of the public had a recording of the meeting, and often would be the case that the council themselves didn't have a recording of that meeting. So Eric Pickles historically was quite an important character in terms of the evolution of transparent, open, accessible committee meetings to the general public. So I know the history of it to some degree, certainly for as long as I've been in it. Yeah, so this was really challenging for officers coming out of COVID, and they started to go back into their council chambers. By this time, councils and members, particularly members, and more so, let's say, those who were not digitally literate before COVID, very quickly had to become digitally literate, and they were using Microsoft Teams. And they kind of got used to that, and they liked using Microsoft Teams. Just to say a little bit about the Teams and the Zoom thing, just to kind of get it out of the way. Zoom was always perceived, and is still, I would argue, a better platform. But the machinery behind the scenes between Zoom, you might remember this thing called Zoom bombing.
Yes, I do.
And you had Microsoft Teams was running, and you had Zoom, and Zoom was a far more prevalent platform. And then came the Zoom bombing, so-called Zoom bombing incident on the back of the Jackie Weaver thing. You've got no authority here, Jackie Weaver, and just absolutely brilliant. So that brought it into the spotlight. But the machinery of Microsoft, given that they'd already got contracts in place with councils right across the country, right across Europe, etc., they had a machine that they were able to bring into play. Now, where did the Zoom bombing story come from? I'll leave that floating in the air. So councils who were risk averse, quite rightly so, then took the view, some started to take the view that actually Teams was a better, more stable platform. And the marketing machine told them that it's better, far more stable. And the affect is that everybody has now migrated, pretty much, not all, about 90% of UK councils are using Microsoft Teams as the ubiquitous remote platform of choice. And Zoom is drifting further and further into the background. And in actual fact, it's more likely that you see Google Meets as a
Mm.
platform. So Hackney Council are a Google house. Most other London councils, I think there's one other London council who are using Google at the moment. And I think it may even be in the fullness of time that they too will drift over to Microsoft Teams. So
Mm.
back in the day, in the 80s or whatever it was, you had this thing called Betamax versus VHS videotapes, and VHS beat Betamax. It's almost an identical technology race. And now we know that the winner of that marketing machine uh, is Microsoft Teams. The good news out of that is we, for example, at Civico, we've been able to talk to Microsoft at quite a deep level. They've been very instrumental in the development of our hybrid meeting system. So we've managed to get some additional tools from them to allow us to make a seamless integration with Microsoft Teams. So this story I told you about how councils were boiling down what was happening in the council chamber, turning that into a single pipe, putting it into Microsoft Teams laptop, outputting that into, all of that we made go away because even Microsoft didn't see the value in having all of that technology unnecessary when actually it could all be resolved natively without any laptops at all, which is what we've obviously managed to do. And that's the kind of future.
So you've covered quite a lot of the timeline, but going back to the early days of Civico, could you tell us a bit about what brought you to where you were when you founded Civico?
Oh my God. I don't know how I got here. Was it John Lennon? Life's what happens while you're busy making other plans. Well, that's exactly what happened to me. So I originally started off, I went to Camberwell Art College. So I was a sculptor, would you believe? And when I left art college, I became a sculptor. And I was also I was a counselor, as in counseling, not as in a council counselor. So I was a psychotherapist for about 17 years. But alongside that, I was also developing my skills as an artist. And I have sculptures outside football grounds. I worked for the council in Sandwell and around the Midlands. They would employ me to go and work with community groups. So I would develop community groups, and as part of that, so with young people, for example, I'd go around to youth centres, youth clubs, engage young people in various arts activities and sports activities. But as part of that process, we would nearly always design a piece of public art. And it would be a mixture of my ability as an artist and their interest in their community. So, for example, outside a registry office in West Bromwich, there is a candle flame, which, if you look at it, we try to include as many people as possible in this piece of artwork. And we worked together with all these various groups, and they came up with this idea that candles is something that all communities use for births, deaths, marriages, any celebration. There's nearly always a candle. So that became a unifying symbol that we could use to create a community sculpture. So I worked with these particular community groups. As part of that, this guy who runs a Jamaican bakery, he makes Jamaican buns and Jamaican bread or whatever. He had some money that he gave to some young people to create a radio station. And to cut long story short, the radio station didn't really take off. So he came to me and said, look, we've got all this equipment. Can you do anything with it? So we said, yeah, we'll make a radio station. I was running a community arts organization at this particular point, employing artists to do various bits and pieces. So we set up a radio station in the middle of the old Bird's custard factory. And the radio station was called Rhubarb Radio. So we worked with students from around Birmingham, and we took live streams. And this is the joining bit. We took live audio streams from all of the music venues from around Birmingham. That was in King's Heath. There was the Hare and Hounds, the Yardbird, the Flapper, various, iconic music venues around the city. And then because Birmingham's got 4 universities, lots of young people descended on the custard factory to join Rhubarb Radio in order to create their own unique radio program. But we could not make any money at this bloody radio station. It cost an absolute fortune to run. I was doing lots and lots of artwork in order to fund it, but it got to the point where this was just not sustainable. But luckily, and somebody from central government had found out what we were doing and came and said there was a thing called the Digital Britain Report, which was going to be announced at the ICC. And could we live stream the Digital Britain Report? We said, yeah, we do. And they said, and we'll pay you. What? You'll pay us? So the light bulb went on pretty fast. I thought, hold on a minute. We are going to be able to make some money at this. So we did the live stream for that. And then I thought, okay. And then a couple of councils came to us and said, we saw what you did with the Digital Britain Report. Could you help us to live stream our council meetings? Yeah, we can do that. So we did that. And again, we got a little bit of money from there. And so I then saw that actually there was a commercial opportunity for me. And I was at a certain age where running around with teenagers and pretending to be, getting involved with street dancing and all the rest, I just didn't have the energy for it. So I said, okay, look, we'll let the radio station drift off. And it's still going to this day. So that became a community enterprise, a KIC project. And I set up Civico, and we started to do live streaming of council meetings, or we tried. This is back in 2008. The other significant factor is in 2008, there was a financial crash, and no council at that time had any money for artwork. So just literally the practicality of running, I was a single parent at the time, trying to run a family on zero income was just not sustainable. So I had to think fast. And when people started to pay for the audio streaming for council meetings, this was a way that I was going to be able to fund not just my interest, but also my blooming family. Then we came up against another bunch of challenges, which was around 2010, 12, people became far more interested in video than just audio. So although we got great expertise in audio streaming from music venues, video is a different kettle of fish. Although even to this day, most people don't get this, but it's really, really important, which is if your video doesn't quite work on your council meetings, people will forgive you, but they will never forgive you if the audio is not correct. So to this day, I preach this, which is audio before video every single time. Of course, the video's got to be good. It's got to be crystal clear, and people want to be able to see and hear, but you have to get the fundamentals right, which you've got to be able to hear the meeting no matter what. So the recording of the audio recording and the live stream is way more important than the video streaming, even though the two things are now connected. So the other key thing, apart from live streaming, which is now relatively straightforward to do, it was difficult back in the day. It's not difficult anymore. But there are other things that councils and democratic service officers are dealing with on a daily basis, which is which microphone system to use, which display screens to use, and if you are going to have cameras, what cameras and where should they go? So there was a lot more complexity brought in to that environment, which we simply just didn't have before. And you then also had a scenario where camera providers were not necessarily talking to microphone manufacturers, and yet increasingly councils needed automation in their council chambers. So when you press on a microphone, you want to have auto tracking. So software providers came in and were starting to do that, joining up. But even to this day, camera manufacturers and microphone manufacturers very rarely talk to each other. It's changed a little bit as we've moved to Microsoft Teams Rooms devices, where they have built-in cameras, they have built-in microphones, and they have built-in speakers. But we saw that you've got microphones, which were disaggregated. You've got cameras, which are just doing their thing. You've got display screens doing their thing. And then you've got modern.gov and CMIS, which were the two main committee information management systems used in the UK. And they were only allowing a one-way integration with those platforms. So we came along and saw that there was this really important need to bring these disparate systems into one system. So our USP was to create, and our ambition was to create an environment where our competitor doesn't exist. And that was, rather than try and compete with these components, that we become the software that glues these things together. Have microphones that provide an API. an application programmable interface, and get the microphones to provide an API, and get the display screens to support an API, and get platforms like modern.gov and CMIS and Qualigraph and all of those document management systems or committee management systems to also support an API. And then what we're doing is we're bringing those APIs together to make them intelligently, those systems to talk to each other. I think we are still the only company with an approved Microsoft Teams integration. So we went across to America, we spoke to them, we basically got some protocols that we really, really needed to try and streamline and make things perfect. And that was the final bit of the jigsaw puzzle. But in actual fact, although we are clever at what we do, and meetings have got an awful lot simpler and easier to manage, a key component is the committee management system. Because in this day and age, what you can do is you can schedule your meeting in modern.gov or CMIS or Qualigraph, and everything else should be completely and utterly automated. If we know who's going to the meeting because you've entered those people into modern.gov, why are we having to re-enter it further into the systems just because you've got microphones? The microphone system should be intelligent enough to be able to utilize that same syndicated information. And if we know who's coming to the meeting and we're able to put them on a particular seat, we can then tell the camera when that microphone is activated, there is a person sitting behind it who's got a name. Please display the name of that person who is sitting behind the microphone and point your camera at that person. And all of that should happen seamlessly without anybody having to do anything. So we create templates for council meetings where we know that it's a cabinet meeting because you've entered that into modern.gov or into Qualigraph. We know when it's a full council meeting, we know when it's a scrutiny meeting, we know when it's a planning, and we know when it's a licensing. And each of those meetings require a slightly different seating layout and camera positioning. And with further advances where you're using ID cards, you put your ID card into the microphone, that ID card's got your name on it. When you put that into a microphone, you've told the microphone who you are. The camera is going to point at the microphone regardless. The microphone tells the system who it is activated their microphone, and that information gets syndicated onto the hall display screens, out to the live webcast, out to any remote attendees who are on Microsoft Teams. So those things are where the technology has now come up to. So we're coming away from this kind of what I call the strapping of the cats together, or unaffectionately, the Teams combo, RIP. That's now gone, thank goodness. So you have a very simple, very elegant system by virtue of the fact that everything in the ecosystem is being forced to talk to every other part, regardless of what manufacturing it is, doesn't really matter. If it's got an API, it can play in this new party. And if you think some of the new challenges when you've got hybrid meetings coming down the line, you don't want to have to send out emails to people on Microsoft Teams. The system simply shouldn't care whether you are joining the meeting on Microsoft Teams or you're joining the meeting in person in a council chamber. So what we do is we take the information from modern.gov or Qualigraph or CMIS or whatever it would be. We syndicate that information out to the templates in the room. So it configures all the cameras, configures all the microphones, does all what it needs to do with the display screens, but it also sends out the meeting invites. So we inform teams that there's going to be a meeting. Great. These are the people who are coming to the meeting. Send them all an invite and update their calendars. And while you're at it, we might as well send them the agenda and the documents and a list of all the people going to that meeting. And we want you to populate that inside your Microsoft Teams instance. So you can now open your Microsoft Teams event for that meeting. And now you can actually see the agenda. So you can review the details of the meeting. So you can prepare, you can make annotation notes or whatever. Whereas before you couldn't have any of those things. So those things are really important, and they come with this kind of streamlined ability. But also, if you've scheduled the meeting in Qualigraph or modern.gov, why on earth are you then having to schedule a live webcast? The system can just take exactly the same information, automatically spin up the live webcast for the council's branded website. But you could also, again, without doing anything, simulcast it to YouTube, because some young people will want to consume that content on YouTube. Simulcast it to LinkedIn, because some of the professional community will want to consume the content on there. But really importantly, the council needs to have the reference copy of its own meetings. You can't just trust it to the Wild West, who can edit and do what they like. So we have this new thing that we're bringing in, where we're going to stamp and authenticate the video so that it cannot be tampered with. So you will be able to detect if somebody has tampered with the video, because it will not be embedded with the correct stamp of that particular council. So as it is at the moment, particularly with YouTube, most people don't realize, with, I've also got an issue with, I think YouTube's okay as a kind of add-on, but it should never be for British councils, for our democratic process to be stored on a US database where they are in charge of that. And what people don't seem to realize is, when you are live streaming only to YouTube, they own that content and they can do what they like with it. So as part of their terms and conditions, those videos are in the ownership of YouTube.